kind of left me with that. And like I said, his other two encounters, I'll get into those a little bit later. I'll go back to it, but he left me hanging with that. And so we talked a little more, but it wasn't anything about Dogman. It was about building hot rods and going to a brothel in Austin in the 60s. It was crazy. A bunch of crazy nonsense. So I ended up going, yeah, okay, and was very polite, and we talked, and we got off the phone. A couple days later, I get in touch with Abel. It was a Sunday. He had just gotten out of church. He's a deacon at his church. He's a real religious guy. He doesn't drink or do any of those things. I guess he used to at one point. He was drinking at one point and smoking cigars every day, and his house caught fire. So I'll tell you about that. But anyways, talk to Abel. And of course I wanted to know everything I could about this dog man that he supposedly caught. Well, he started from the beginning too, and he basically just reiterated everything that Noah had told me going back to the beginning with the hole that they covered up. And he talked, and of course the numbers were a little different, it wasn't exact and identical, but it was basically the same thing. I got the gist of the same story. But when I got to the part about his encounters, he goes, dude, I've encountered these things over and over again. And then he said every day for several months I encountered one. And I'm like, how is that? And he says, because I caught one. Now, that's what I wanted to know. And so I told him, I said, can you tell me about this? And he says, yeah, oh, yeah. He said that back in the late 60s, now I'm not for sure because these guys are, they're getting up there in years. And I think that Abel's like 77 or something like that. I can't remember exactly what he said, 74, 77. He's old. So he said that he was out on the property. Now, according to Noah, when he was away in Vietnam, this is when it happened, when he was gone. So he remembers seeing one of these things like that looked like that, but he wasn't there when this thing was caught. Now, apparently, Jerry, the guy that I originally met from the last interview, whatever I was telling you about, his dad, Andrew, he remembers this, supposedly, but he didn't really talk about it. But Abel and one of his guys that worked for him, because at that point he was kind of like the foreman of the ranch. He kind of had taken over. So he was checking the property, and he went down near that creek, and he said right there near that creek that we played at as a kid, it was dry at that time. He said he went down there and he found a dead one, a female. Now I asked him about that, and I said, well, it was a female. And he says, it was definitely a female. And I said, how do you know? And he says, because it had teats. I was like, so what did they look like? What did it look like? He said that it had like what looked like female breasts on top with little like dog looking like how dogs would have, and they just went all the way down. And that's really weird. Like he said that it looked almost like a cross between human and dog. And so he said that the teeth went all the way down its body. And so I was blown away by that, But then he tells me that they heard a whining noise, like a puppy, whimpering, whining, and then almost like a moan. And so they went into the woods. He said not far into the woods, but on the other side of the creek bed. They go into the woods, they follow the sound, and they see this little guy. And his exact words, he said there was this little guy up there in the tree. And he said that on my horse, I could almost touch his foot, but it was like squishing itself into a ball. And he said that it almost fell. And so he thought, well, maybe I could pull it down. He said it was real small. He said it was smaller than a domestic dog. He said that they got the idea to lasso it. And he said that they were afraid that it might hurt it when it hit the ground. But he said, no, they're pretty resilient. That it fell, it just kind of popped back up, and then it kind of tried to run around the tree, and it got wrapped around the tree. And then eventually he said that they subdued it, and it bit one of them pretty bad on his arm. And he said the thing had real sharp teeth, like razor sharp teeth. And he said that these things have teeth sharper than any dog you could imagine. He's like, it's unreal. So he said that they got it under control. He said they managed to tie its arms, but he goes, the horse was rearing and kicking, wasn't nothing to do with it. So they got this burro, and he said that they tied him behind her, and they just had him follow along, and that it had a really hard time walking on just two legs. He said that it kept wanting to get down on all fours. And he said that this thing had big oversized paw feet, as he said. He said he looked almost like a rabbit. The feet were too big, their back feet. And he said that they kind of grow into their feet. That's what he said. They have these really big oversized paws. So anyway, he said that they got it back to the house and that it was terrified. They stuck it in one of the barns and that it just went and sat in the corner and whimpered all night and it wouldn't eat. He tried to feed it. It wouldn't eat. And he said that eventually his wife got the idea to soak bread in milk and give it to it. Then it ate. It ate the milk bread and then it drank milk too. And he said that after they got it to eat, he said that it started eating all the time. He said it was ravenous. This thing ate constantly. He said it was always hungry. And he said that he would feed it kibble. And eventually it got to where it would eat out of his hand. He said, I hand fed this thing. Now this is what he told me. Okay. He said that they started feeding it slabs of beef. And he said that it ate everything. It would eat the offal. It would eat everything. You know, it didn't matter what part of the meat. It just, you could give it anything. It would eat it. He said it would chew bones. And he said the jaws were really strong, that they could snap through bone easy. And he said that this thing started growing. But one of the things he told me, though, he said he got worried because it had started to lose its hair. Another thing was that when he first brought it home, his dad tried to kill it. His dad grabbed a pitchfork and tried to impale it when he was just a little thing. He had to literally save its life. And he said that his dad almost killed him, almost stabbed him with it. He was so adamant about getting rid of it. Eventually, it started to lose its hair. And he said that it grew back some as it got older and got more, my words, habituated is what I think. As it got more habituated, it began to get its hair back. He said, but its hair was still in patches, which is, I don't know what that is, stress or something. I don't know. And he said that they gave it a name. They called it stripes. And I asked him about that, and he said that it had gray fur underneath its ears that came down into like a V on its chest. That's weird. He said that it was a very unique pattern, like, you know, that he hadn't seen any others like that. And I asked him how many others had he seen, and he said that he had seen several because he would go deep into the woods and he would see them. He said that they would sometimes parallel him in the woods, and I was like, weren't you afraid? And he's like, no, I never had a real fear of them because they never attacked us. They never attacked me. And he said that that stemmed from the fact that he had heard all these stories, but he said it killed the livestock and whatever, but it never really managed to kill many people. Now, it did kill some people. People died, like those guys that disappeared and then the guy that got dragged into the woods. But he said that, you know, he believed that if they really wanted to, they would have just killed everybody. And they didn't. So I guess his idea was that they do have some sense of, hey, this is not a good idea. So he says that they do hurt people. Now, Noah basically had told me what he thinks is that Abel's got this idealized version of him in his head. It's his exact words where he's delusional. But when I talked to Abel, Abel told me that that's not the case. He's like, Noah may think that I think that they're all good and everything. He's like, but they're not. I know they're not all good. He's like, there's a lot of them that are really bad. He's like, but it's like people. There's good ones and there's bad ones. So I guess Noah looks at them as animals and Abel kind of looks at them as people, you know, or gives them more of a persona, you know. And he said that Stripes grew to be a little bigger than a man by the time they let him go, or that he forced him to go. He said he literally had to carry him into the woods and try to make him, but that he kept hanging around near the property. And his dad hated him. He didn't like him. He didn't want anything to do with any of them. He thought that they were all bad, all completely evil. There was nothing good about them. That he said that one day that thing's going to kill you and eat you. And he said that obviously it didn't because I'm still here. And he said that periodically him and his wife would go to the edge of the woods and they would leave food for it. He didn't elaborate on what the food was, but he did say that sometimes his wife would bake stuff and take it out there. I don't know. It's weird. I mean, like, I guess he had a relationship with this thing. This thing became, like family to him because he referred to it as his boy. He says he was my boy, you know, and he goes, and I loved him and he loved me and we were friends. One time he said that he was walking through this trail where there was this barn that was kind of the halfway point where they would keep hay. And that's all it was, just a storage barn for hay. That's all it was. And he said that, it started to rain. So he had ducked into this little corner of the barn, whatever, to get out of the rain. And he said he had this little transistor radio in his pocket, a little radio. He turned it on and he heard this crackling, popping noise and he thought it was coming from the radio. And then he realized that he knew what that was. It was one of these things. So he clicked the radio off and he heard it like something moving in the hay. And then he heard a growling noise and he turns and he looks and he sees this dark brown female. And he said that he knows it was a female. He could tell at this point, he had been around him enough. And he was like, oh no, I'm in trouble now. Because the only one, I guess, that he was really friendly with was Stripes. That was it. The other ones, he didn't know anything about them, and he said that I didn't know anything about these other ones. And he said that he heard whimpering, like he had woke up, when puppies wake up or something, and he heard this whimpering, crying, and he heard like several puppies crying. And he said, oh no, there's a female in here with puppies. I'm in big trouble. And he said that just then he heard something else come around the back of the barn or whatever. He said that it sounded like heavy, heavy footsteps, and he thought there must be a large male with this thing. And he said she was like staring at him, growling, but she wasn't in like pounce mode yet. And then he said that when that thing came out of the back of the barn, it was still daylight. He goes, but you couldn't see clearly. He's like, but sure enough, I saw the pattern of my boy. I saw his chest and I knew it was him. And he thought, oh my God, I'm saved. So he said that he came up to where he was at, got in between him and the female, got her to back off. And I didn't ask to go into details about how that went down. He just said that it basically got in between him and this other female that was angry. And he said that there was a small one kind of trawling behind it, like hanging on his leg. And he said that it looked like a little miniature version of him. And he said that I knew at that point that they had babies. And he just kind of slowly backed away and got out of there, and he said that he walked as slow and as careful as you can. He said the only thing you can do when you're cornered by these things is just to back away. It's like there's nothing else you can do, And so he said that after that initial contact with the female, he said that eventually she became kind of acclimated to him too, that every now and then he would see the pups around as they grew. And he said that, they look just like wolves, but they can stand up. That's what he said, but they have human looking shoulders. And I asked him what he thought they were, because Noah thinks they're just wolves. They're just wolves that mimic people, as he says. They learned how to walk or whatever. He says monkeys can mimic people, and I say, yeah, but wolves aren't primates. But Abel said that he thinks that they're just like people. He says they're just like another tribe of people. And that's what he calls them. He calls them a tribe. He doesn't call them a pack. Like me, if I refer to wolves, I refer to them as a pack. He's calling these things a tribe, which is giving them more human characteristics, like saying that they're like Native American tribes or something. And one of the things that he told me, like he said, this thing grew fast. Like when he had it, he said that it grew really, really quickly. And I thought it was interesting, that this thing, he fed it dog food for a long time, but it would also eat people food. And that he said that these things would eat berries. He gave it all kinds of different stuff. He said that it would eat anything. It was pretty much an omnivore, according to him. Now, I don't know if they're like that in the wild, but I know that the one that he had, that he, I guess for lack of a better term, domesticated, did eat different types of food. He said that he would give them all kinds of stuff, and sometimes it would eat vegetables. And I didn't ask him to elaborate on what kind of vegetables it ate, but he said that it would eat fruit, it would eat vegetables, it ate all kinds of meat, and he said that it would eat dog food. Whatever you gave it, it would eat it. He said that sometimes it would be kind of leery of a new food, but that if it watched him eat it, then it would eat it too. And that's funny because my own dogs do that. I thought about that. Like if my dogs see me eating celery or something that they never eat, they'll want some. And then they'll put it in their mouth and they might chew it. And I've gotten them to eat grapes. So I'm thinking, I don't know if that's the canine side. I don't know what that is. It's just weird. It's a weird phenomenon. And so anyway, over the years, I guess this thing, he thinks that eventually this thing went back to its original tribe, and he thinks that it took over. It took control. He goes, because until Stripes got big and had pups, I guess, with this female apparently, that there was still predation happening to the cattle. And sometimes one of their dogs, because he said that they have really big, strong Spanish mastiffs, mastines, with spiked collars they use to patrol the property. And according to him, he said these things, they would get with those dogmen. He didn't call them dog, he called them wolves, but he said that 4 of those things could get on one of those dogmen. He said because those big old collars kept their necks, and these dogs, I used to have a mastiff. I had an English mastiff, not a Spanish one, but I know what he's talking about. They're huge. Mine was 130 pounds. It was like a really friendly pit bull, but once you keyed it up or sicked it on somebody, that was it. I mean, they're toast. Those things are tough. I mean, I know the Romans used them to hunt lions, but he was telling me, he goes, I had some pretty tough dogs. He said every now and then I'd lose one. and they would go out into the woods and they would chase something and then they wouldn't come back. But he said that they were pretty good at fighting these things or keeping them away from the house, doing their job, basically defending the property. He said that he had one named Maggie and that it became really close to this dog man that he had acclimated to people, and that he was really close to her, and she treated him almost like a mama. And when he had gotten her to be cool with him, it kind of followed her around, and that was like his mother, which I thought was interesting, that he had this dog that was like his pal, and then she had a litter, and one of the pups in that litter, who turned out to be the runt, actually became Stripe's buddy. And when he finally kicked him out, whatever, that dog ran off and went to go hang out with him in the woods. And so he said that, I don't know whatever became of him, but he basically took off and was his friend. Pretty interesting. Just listening to this guy talk about this gave me a better understanding of the dynamics of these things. And I'm not saying that it's like that everywhere you go, but that tells me a little bit about these things, like they're not just mindless killing machine beasts, I guess at one point I should say, not we, but I guess I thought at one point that they're just a bunch of killers roaming around the woods that could just kill you on sight. And I guess I had that thought because I was afraid of them. So anyways, what ended up happening, he said that he hadn't seen Stripes in a long, long time. I asked him about that. When was the last time he had seen him? And he said that one day he was out in the woods and he heard all this fighting, snapping, and he ran back to the house because it scared him. And he said it took a lot for him to be afraid, but he knew something had happened. He said that he thinks that that was the point where Stripes went back and took over. Now, when you piece it together, and he didn't tell me this, but this is what I think. I think that one that he domesticated, I think that his dad might have been the alpha or something, and I think he got deposed. And I think that the mother was probably trying to protect him or save him, and maybe he had siblings that got wiped out too, because lions do that. The new male comes in and it'll kill the cubs and try to mate with the female. If the females resist, then they'll kill the female. And so when Abel, and I should probably tell you this part, I think I forgot it, when Abel found that female, he said that it looked like it had been chewed up. It was dead. It was killed, I should say. Not just like it died of natural causes. He said that it had been chewed up. So I'm thinking the other members of the pack tore her up, probably trying to protect her cubs. She wasn't willing to breed. I don't know. I don't know how that works. I don't know enough about these things to give you a good answer to that. But this is what Abel was kind of telling me. And that's what I was able to glean from his story, that that's what happened. And that's what I believe too, that this probably the case. That was why he was hiding in the tree or whatever, And so according to what Abel told me, he went back and assumed control of the tribe because he said that Stripes was a big boy and that he was well over 8 feet. The one that I saw was 7 foot 5 inches. And I know that because we measured from the floor to the window. But according to him, this thing was over 8 feet tall. There's some of the questions I asked him, and he told me that it was huge. He said that it was a good foot taller, at least, over the female that it ran around with. And he said that the pups grew and that some of them looked like the dad, and that he said that sometimes he would see one and think, oh, that's Stripes. No, that's not. That's one of his kiddos. And they were okay with him too, because they would go out to that barn and they would leave food periodically, and he said that there was no problems, no aggression, nothing after that initial encounter from the female. He said that when they were real young, he kind of stayed away until they got a little older, a little bigger, so she wouldn't be as protective. And so that's the story about that. So what ended up happening, according to him, the last time he saw Stripes was well over 10 years ago, and that he looked really old. He saw him walking on this ridgeline, and he said that he had a couple of the other ones with him and that he looked like he was hobbling, like that was it for him, and he said that he doesn't know the whole dynamics or how it works either. He just knows that shortly after the last time he saw him, he said that the predation started back up, that they started losing dogs. And he said that here lately it's gotten really bad. I mean, they're having all kinds of problems. He said all of the cats are gone. He said he's lost most of his dogs and he's lost some cows. And he said that a couple of the cows were just killed outright. They weren't even eaten. They just got slaughtered. So he says that his brother and Shane's younger brother, who I actually know is a real dumb, that they had gone out there to try to bag one of these things. Now, this happened back in the fall. Now, I haven't talked to JoJo since like September, so I don't know what has transpired with this guy or whatever between the fall and now. But apparently they had gone out there and they shot one of these things. And he said this happened back in the fall. This is what Abel and Noah both told me. And that after they shot it, a bunch of stuff started happening. The thing about what JoJo did is that he doesn't live out there. So he goes out there and gets together with Cody, which is Shane's younger brother, who's really interested in killing one of these things. They want to kill it, put it on YouTube and show the world, hey, look, this is what is out here, which is so stupid. And those old timers don't want anything to do with the government or anybody coming out there to their property. And Noah was very adamant. He said, if somebody comes out to my property, I'm going to shoot them. I don't play around, you know. And now Abel didn't say nothing like that. He just said that, you know, they've had the government out there before. Some guys came out there from Fort Sam looking around and tried to come on the property, and they made them leave. Now, he said that he knows that the sheriff's department, they've been out there too, because the guy that works for the sheriff's department, his grandfather knew his dad, and he knew Shane's grandfather and everybody. So his dad was a cop. And so he says that they knew about these things going way back when all that stuff was happening back in the 30s. They would come to the property. Oh, nothing they could do. I mean, what are they going to do? They can't do nothing about these things. He said they know they exist, but he thinks that maybe some of the local law enforcement had tipped off somebody in the military, and that's why they came nosing around. I don't know what to think about that. That's a whole nother thing, but they're real worried about people messing around out there or whatever, coming out to their property. And I know that when Joseph and Cody shot one of these things, and Abel seems to think they killed it, he said, but they don't allow their dead to stay for very long. He says, if one of them's dead, he goes, and you get to go up and get a good look at it, it's going to be gone soon. You have a very short window for these things. You know, and I've heard that with Sasquatch too, that supposedly, you know, one of them dies. I had this lady that lives up in Oregon, and she was telling me, she's like, one of them died, and it was like in the back by this creek behind their house, and it was only there for a little while, and then it was gone. Well, I'm pretty sure these things do the same thing. They grab their dead. Do they bury them? I have no idea. I don't know anything about that. That is just so much weirdness for me to even contemplate. You know, I don't even know what they could possibly do with them. But I know that they don't allow people to take them. So he said that, you know, this one that they shot, they used a 50 caliber, and so they can be killed. And Abel and Noah were very adamant about that, because I told them that people would shoot these things periodically and that nothing would happen to them. Like, they were impervious to bullets, and they both laughed, both of them, you know, and I wasn't talking to them at the same time. You know, I was talking to them separately. And Abel, you know, he was like, that's bull. He goes, you can kill anything. If it bleeds, it dies. He goes, and these things are just creatures just like we are. He says God's creatures. That's his opinion. I understand that. But he says they're just God's creatures like we are. He goes, they bleed, they die, they get old, they get sick. And Noah, he claims that they know good and well what a gun is, because, and I'll get back to his other encounter. And one of the encounters he had, he was out in the woods hunting rabbits, and one of these things popped up behind a log, and he said he heard that popping noise. He heard that, you know, noise, the way he made it with his, I can't do it, but he said that, you know, he heard it, and he looked, and he sees one just growling, standing right there. And he said that he pointed his rifle at it, and it ducked down between some trees. And he said that these things are smart. They know exactly what that gun is capable of. He says, and I use incendiary rounds, he goes, because fire works best. So he said that he had actually popped one of them in the shoulder one time, he thinks by accident, but he didn't even get a good look at it. He just heard a yelp. They were playing around near an area where they go and they shoot, and he thinks one of them might have been sleeping close to the wood line, and that they just started firing into the woods, and he heard like a yelping noise. And he also claimed that he heard a wild boar. He thinks there's a big male boar out there that they killed that was near 700 pounds, Vic. Now, these things get huge, because I know in my hometown, somebody killed one, and get this, that was near Granger Lake, where I'm from, 900 pounds. 900 pounds. I saw the pictures, and I know the guy that did it. So this really happened. This is no fairy tale. It was almost 900, it was 890 pounds. So these things get really big. He said they had a really big male boar out there, and he thinks that one of those younger ones got tore up by it, because he heard a growling, howling, whatever, and then he heard one of these hogs out there, and he said that they were just going to war, like they were fighting. And he said that he heard like a yeah, 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 you know how dogs when they get injured, you know. And he thinks that this boar may have gored this thing to death because he said that they would see that hog around periodically. It was a wild boar. Here in Texas, they're everywhere. Adam told him there's a dead one out there by the tree line. And he said that, yeah, I heard it getting into a fight with that big boar that we got on the property. So anyway, he said that this thing became a big problem. So they went out and they decided to kill it. And he said that this thing not only had killed that dog man, but it had also badly gored a couple of their dogs. And that this thing was just a mutant, you know. So eventually he said that they bagged it. They killed it. 680 pounds. That's a big boy. And he said that it was mean, that his head was so, he said it looked prehistoric, this thing that they killed. He said, I'd never seen a hog look like that. It was just deformed looking. It was mean, you know. It was funny because I told him, I said, I'd heard stories of these hogs getting really big, and there was one that they called Hogzilla, you know. He said, well, he's like, this thing looked like Godzilla. You know? He's like, it was horrible, you know. And he said that they knew that if this thing could get with one of those wolves, that it would make short work of a person. And so they were like, we got to do something, you know. We had kids out here and stuff, and so they had to get rid of it, you know. And so they went after it. But the thing about it that strikes me is just the level of intelligence that these things have. I had always heard, oh, they're smart, you know, but it just blows my mind, like how smart they can really be. You know, like when I hear stories, people tell me about them turning doorknobs and unscrewing light bulbs and communicating. And when people are out in the woods and how they get followed by them and they feel like they're being flanked, and it's so scary to think of something that deadly and that intelligent. It's no wonder that our government and our military are trying to figure out what they are if they don't already know. I'm sure they know they exist, but they're probably wanting to figure it out. You know, now I got friends that believe that they're government experiments themselves. I don't know, but I think that the fact that these things have been around for as long as they have, I think that kind of closes the book on that. Now, maybe they have gotten some of them, and that's why we have the different types. Now, I don't know a lot about the different types. I know that you have that theory about the different types or whatever, but I don't know. Every time I think I found an answer to something, there's more questions that pop up. So yeah, in the fall, Joseph and Shane's stupid brother went out there and shot one of them. He said that now it's gotten really bad. He thinks that it's going to start a whole new level of violence. It's going to take place. Abel seems to think that there are two big ones that are in charge now. And he said that they're reddish brown in color, which makes sense because that's what Shane had told me. The one that attacked him was reddish brown. And he said that they're two big males. He thinks they're brothers. And that they may actually be descendants of the one that he caught because the mother was a reddish brown one. But he said that he doesn't know. He has no idea. And he said that big black one that Joseph killed, he said that was a huge mistake. And he said, I know why he did it because, you know, the one that attacked him in the house, he said that thing, he thinks because they had shot at one of them before, he said that he thinks that thing stalked him out there to that property he was working on. And that's why it went into the house. He said it went into the house to kill him. That's what he said. He really believed that. And he said that Jojo going out there and shooting at the first one he saw was a big mistake because he said that the one that he thinks that the one that attacked him in the house when he was working on the cabinets, I don't know if you remember that story from episode 116, but he said that one had to have been a big male because it had to have been like 8-9 feet tall. He said it was huge. And he said there's a black one that's bigger than the two brothers that he thinks is either kind of like rogue. It's kind of on its own or whatever. Like it got cast out or something, or maybe it's subordinate to those two reddish brown ones. He doesn't know. He said he thinks it's a real young one that has just grown into its, you know, whatever its prime. And, he said that the one that they went out there and shot back in the fall was a female. And he said that was a huge mistake doing that. And he said that he thinks that a whole new series of events is about to take place. Now, unfortunately, when Abel was talking to me, his interview that I gave him was sandwiched between two other calls that I was falling asleep. I was really tired and it was early for me because I had to be up all night the night before. And so when we were talking, I actually fell asleep at the end of the conversation. Unfortunately, I feel bad about it, but I didn't get to finish listening to his story he was telling me about one of his encounters with these things and he was giving me information very polite, articulate, educated guy, very friendly. And so he, like I said, was a real contrast to his brother Noah. He didn't give me a bunch of other stuff, that I had to sift through and pick out like vegetables in a garden. I just was able to talk to the guy and get to the point, and he told me everything that he had, and he was just talking, and I told him, well, I'll call you tomorrow. And then he said, no, I'm packing tomorrow to go to Lubbock. My daughter's getting remarried, whatever. So I have not been able to get back with him. And I debated about maybe trying to finish interviewing him before I got in touch with you. But I was like, you know what? I want to get these stories out there while they're fresh. So there may be more from him anyway, because I didn't get all of the encounters or whatever. I know that there was one other story where Noah was walking along a tree line where there were dewberries. Now, they're called blackberries, but here in Texas, they grow wild, and we call them dewberries. So him and his wife were picking dewberries, and he heard some snapping noises in the woods, like some twigs snapping. So Noah said he pointed his rifle, and he heard whatever it was kind of jog away. That was his words. So that tells you the level of intelligence these things have, just to see a gun. And he didn't even see the thing. He just knew that it was there. Usually he says that the leveling of a rifle is enough to make them back off. He said, but the old timers claim that when they attack you, they'll attack you from behind. And this is what Noah said that was very intriguing. And I've wondered this, Vic, and I don't know the answer, but this is what I think is the deal. And I think that, that when he was telling me this, I think he's right. Okay. And I'll tell you what he said. He said that the people that see these things face on, he said they don't attack like that. He said they'll bluff charge you. He said, but what they'll do is they'll melt into the woods, and then they'll attack you from the side, or they'll grab you from behind and bite the back of your neck. And he said that that's how they attack their prey. And I said, how do you know that? He said, because the old timers said that. They watched them attack cows. They watched them attack horses. They killed horses. They slaughtered dogs. He's like, that's how they did it. He said, and there were people that were killed too. And now he told me this. He said, there's several bodies buried on this property. He goes, I can tell you that right now with certainty, from the old days, from that whole episode that went on, back in those days. So I think that's true. I think that when people see them head on, and I'm not saying this is the whole case, so don't take my word and then somebody gets attacked and like, well, Wolf said you can just stare. No. Please don't do this, ladies and gentlemen. Please do not think that you're safe just because you see them head on. But I think it's like that, though. They're ambush predators, dude. I think that that's what they do. I think that when you run into one by itself, according to what Abel told me, he thinks that, or not Abel, Noah, he said that it's like a scout, or it could be a rogue, because he's like, they're usually not alone. He's like, see, you run in with one by itself and you see it. He's like, it's probably not alone. He said, but if it is, then it's probably just like scouting around, it's like they send one out to go look, reconnaissance, I guess. And he said that they tend to be attack from behind predators, because getting hurt, and this is my words, but getting hurt in nature could cost you your life. I mean, they get injured by a knife or a gun or something, bacterial infection sets in, they're dead. As they don't have antibiotics. A Bigfoot or a dogman or whatever, a wolf, a dog, whatever that lives wild, there's no coming back from an injury. A lot of times that's it. You just die. But according to what Abel told me, and I asked him about that later, I got his opinion, which they're differing opinions, differing school of thoughts about everything. And Abel said that he believes that they heal really quickly. Because he said that there was one that lived out on the property that only had one paw. Its front paw was gone, like it had been chopped off. And he said that he would see it, and that it would hop around on 3 legs, and then it would get up and run around on 2 legs. He said, but its front forearm or forepaw, whatever, was gone. He said that one was a gray one. And he said that that's the one, they call it the chicken killer, that it goes into the chicken coops and raids the chicken coops, and that it eats eggs and stuff. So that's weird. I mean, like he told me about that. So, this thing actually lost its paw. And I've seen stories or heard stories of bears or whatever having like one paw. I've never actually seen it, but I've heard of it happening and being able to survive. But it's very rare that an animal will lose a limb or have an injury and just be able to recover fully and live. So there's that.
I don't know, Josh. It sounds like a great place not to live to me.
Yeah, and you know what? I was talking to my friend about that. We were talking about these guys. My friend who's a Bigfoot researcher, and we were talking about the different people that we talked to and how it's crazy because how do these people stay living on these properties? I look at it like this. I lived in a house that had a lot of paranormal activity that took place when I was younger. It didn't happen all the time. It was like sometimes it was there, sometimes it wasn't. And most of the time it was a very nice, peaceful place to live. And I liked living there. Stuff went on. I'm not even going to get into stuff. I don't want to go there. That's a whole nother deal, but it didn't happen all the time. And I guess it affected other people worse than it did me. So I guess it was just one of those things, these guys grew up there from the time that they were boys, little boys. They were born there, raised there, their whole lives. So I guess that's all they know, that it's become normal to them. The only time that Noah ever deviated from his life there was when he went away to war. So that ain't like a good experience. It's not like he's going to go, wow, I had such a great time overseas. I think that I need to expand my horizons. No, the only time he ever left was to do a horrible job that he was forced into, so it's home to them. It's home. That's all they know, And one other thing I was going to tell you, there was one story that I knew about Andrew, and this is from his son, Jerry. Abel and Noah, they all pretty much told me the same thing about him. They said that the reason that Andrew doesn't talk about any of these things is because he was taken, for lack of a better word, I guess, kidnapped. They said that he was swiped, taken, whatever, by one of these things, and that it kept him out in the woods, and that he was playing with a smaller one when he was little. He would always wander off, like always head in the clouds, is what Abel said. And that he wandered off too close to the wood line and was playing with one of these little ones, and that it lured him into the woods. Well, his words, that it lured him. And that this female took him and tried to just hold him. And he said that when he came back, he told the story, and then he never would talk about it again, ever in his whole life. He never spoke of it again. And he would never talk about it, he never wanted to bring it up. He was one of the people that was never okay with Stripes being on the property. He was never okay with it. And one of the things that Abel and his wife died a few years ago. She died of cancer. I wish I could have talked to her, but he said that him and his wife continued to have relations with Stripes, and that sometimes they would lay food out on the edge of the property, and that sometimes a head of cattle would get taken, and that this is weird. He believes Stripes was the one doing it, would leave a deer carcass, like in exchange. You see what I'm saying? Like trading. And, Andrew, he's Jerry and them's dad. He was against the acclamation of this thing being, he didn't like it being around. He never trusted it. He had always told Jerry and them to be careful from these things. And I don't know what happened. If he got taken and this thing let him go, then I guess they're not all bad. Noah seems to think that Abel has he's deluded to think that they're okay. But Abel says that he's under no illusions. He's like, there's good ones and there's bad ones. And he goes, and I know that I had a good one. I know in my heart he was a good guy. But these other ones, he goes, I don't trust them. I don't even trust the ones that he had as pups. He goes, I don't know them. I knew him when he was around. I was safe, but I don't believe that they won't hurt you. He's like, I don't believe that you can just be completely safe from anything that's a large predator. And I understand that. People in Africa live around hyenas and lions. They're there. They can kill you. It happens sometimes. But what do? I mean, there's nothing you can really do. You just got to keep your eyes and ears open. People that live in America, in a city in particular, there's no way. I mean, you have people that are criminals that are bad. You got to watch out. But the odds of it are so, it's like, dude, you're dealing with civilization. You're out in the wild, dude. Anything that's out there can just kill and eat you. And you have to understand that. And I guess these guys living in the middle of nowhere, that's what happens. I mean, it's like a daily thing for them. They don't have any illusions. They know that when they go out, that they can maybe not come back. I can't imagine living like that. I couldn't do it. There's no way I could do it. I mean, I saw one time and that was all it took, But I guess if you've grown up with it and you've been taught about it since you were babies, I guess that their whole perception is just completely different. One other thing I was going to tell you too, I was told that every once in a while they would get these weird little gifts that would be left on the property that looked like, to them it looked like sticks tied together with gut, and they would be in weird shapes like snowflake looking things, I don't know. And they don't know what it is, like if that's their way of giving you a gift, like a decoration, or what it stands for, or what it was. But they do believe that those things are from the dogman, from the wolves, as they call them. I was going to tell you a funny story, and I know I told you in the pre-interview. Back in January, they had a quinceañera out there. Now, my mother is Mexican, and I know how it goes. And Noah's a real funny guy, man. He's really, really a funny guy. But he was saying that his primo, his cousin, told him, hey, man, let us come out there and have the big party out there at your house. Get that big ranch. And he told him, because Abel had already told him no. And so he said, no, and he kept, being real pushy. So he goes, one night we got to drinking. And so I said, okay, fine. Come out to the property. You can bring them out. He goes, but I got to warn you. He goes, we got these wolves out here. And his cousin just kind of laughed, because I guess the ones that live in town, they don't really the way it seems to me is that they don't grasp the enormity of the real problem. So I don't know if those are the right words, but it just seems like to me that they're not getting it. Even the ones that seem to know, because Noah said that some of them do know, because we talked about that. But he said that they had a quinceañera out there for his great niece. So anyway, he said that about midnight, he was starting to get really tired. He said that the whole woods, I guess, because they were out, being loud. He said that it just erupted with howls. And he said that him and his brother Joseph, they knew exactly what it was. And they just kind of looked at each other and smiled. And he said that it was so loud and it was so persistent. Eventually, everybody just kind of stopped dancing, stopped partying, and was just sitting there listening to it. He said that it was echoing. It was scary. And he said that he's heard it before. He's used to it. He said that if you took like 50 wolves and had them howl at one time, that's what it sounded like. And he said that it was just so loud, and that everybody was just kind of like stopped. And he said that everybody just had this stunned look on their face, like they were waiting for something to happen. And then he said, okay, folks, party's over. And he told them, he goes, I was so glad that it interrupted everybody's festivities so he could like go to sleep. And he said that his one cousin, she told him, she goes, man, you got a lot of coyotes out on the property. And he's like, those aren't coyotes. And she's like, what are they? He goes, you don't want to know. And she just kind of gave him a puzzled look. And then he went inside and went to sleep, and everybody left. So I guess that's the upside. If you got relatives over and you want them to leave, well, the wolves ran them off.
Yeah, that would definitely do it. And I don't know, Josh, the idea of keeping a domesticated dogman around the property, that just creeps me out.
Yeah, I don't know how he could do it. But another point to that, supposedly, and this is what Noah had told me, and so I asked Abel about it, that dog man saved his life. It saved him from a fire, because this is what Abel said. He used to drink a fifth of Jack every day. He had a drinking problem real bad, because he had a wife that actually had passed away before the one that he ended up being married to for a long, long time. I guess he said he got married when he was 19, and that she had a car accident. And then he got remarried in his early 20s, and I guess that was the one that became really close with that dog man. So he developed a drinking problem, and I guess one night his wife, she would leave periodically to go out of town or whatever. I don't know what she did, but he said that whenever she wasn't around, he would get real depressed. This is what Noah said, actually. And he said that he was like codependent, basically. If he didn't have his wife around, he felt like he would get real depressed. And so this was years after, and he thinks that he was pining over his first wife, which he never got over, supposedly. This is Noah telling me this. But he said that he would drink himself into a stupor, and Abel confirmed that. He said, yeah, before I found Jesus, before I found God, I drank a lot, and I would imbibe regularly. And that's his exact words. Like I said, he's a pretty articulate guy, but he said that I used to smoke a cigar and I would drink whiskey, and that one night I fell asleep. And he said earlier that day, he had seen his boy, as he called them, Stripes, looking through the window at him. And he said that he had taught him how to wave. Now, I don't know if that's true or if he was just pulling my leg, but he said he could wave. He would like acknowledge him. And he saw him looking in the window, and he just kind of waved at him. And he fell asleep. Now, there was a fire. He doesn't remember anything. He just remembers waking up outside of the house that was burned down. And this was the house that he had built that was behind their ancestral boyhood home that his dad Adam had built. And he eventually moved into that main house or whatever because his older brother, Adam, had moved further off and built another plot. Now what he's living in is essentially their boyhood home. He has that house. It's just him there now. He's a widower or whatever. And so he believes, and Noah believes it too, that Stripes saved his life, that he saw him fall asleep and the fire started. He took him and brought him out of it. I don't know. I mean, maybe if he wouldn't have acclimated that dog man to humans, he wouldn't be alive right now to be even interviewed about it.
Just about the only thing I can think of that's creepier than having a domesticated dog man around your property is having a dog man around your property that can wave at you.
I'm telling you, man, I couldn't even imagine that, dude. And he's got 2 sons, and I guess one of them works in the oil fields and the other one is a military life or whatever. But he said that his sons got to know these critters too. He said that one of his sons had a relationship not too unsimilar to the one he had with Stripes with one of the females that was younger generation. So I don't know. He said that when he was younger, his son gave one of them a baseball. He don't know what he did with it, but he just said that he gave him a baseball. And I was like, did they play with it? Or he goes, I don't know. He goes, you'd have to ask my son about that. But weird, man. Weird, wild stuff.
Yeah, that is awfully weird. And if JoJo started a war with them all over again, that's not good.
No, not at all.
Yeah, I don't know why he'd want to do that. Did Noah ever say if he was afraid of Stripes, even though Stripes never hurt him? It sounds to me like he was.
Yeah, he didn't like them. That's one thing Noah did say. He said, I don't give a if these wolves can do tricks, dance. He goes, I don't care. He goes, I don't like them. I don't trust them. He said that he would see his brother out there, like, giving him food or whatever, and he was just like, what a fool. What a fool. And he thinks that one of those that he raised the rifle at might have been Stripes or one of his people or whatever. But he said that he didn't care. He's like, I told my brother, that if that thing comes near me, I'm going to shoot it. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Of course, he was overseas. He was in Vietnam when all this was going on. So he comes back and there's like this dog man that they had befriended or whatever, and he never saw it. There were pictures of it. Well, I should say picture, because when I asked Abel about it, he said that there was a photo. But of course there was a fire, so he lost everything he owned, But he said that according to him, sometimes he would go out into the woods and he would play his guitar and he knew that they were around listening, that they liked it. When I told Noah that, Noah was like, he's a fool. He's an old fool, man. He's like, one of these days he's going to get eaten by one of those things. He's going to know what I'm talking about. But to me, Noah has not had a lot of interaction with these things. So what does he really know? I mean, all he knows is he doesn't like these things. He doesn't like them on the property. And he said that if he could, he would kill them all. So that's his take on it. That's how he feels. Abel doesn't feel that way. Abel feels like, there's peace. If you leave them alone, they leave you alone. Like he said, he's like, I'm pushing 80 and I'm still alive. And I've had lots of interactions with these things. He's like, if they were really all that bad, as Noah paints the picture, that they are, he's like, we'd all be dead. And he said it's like anything else. He goes, you can take a bear or a cougar and you can domesticate it. He said, I had a friend that had a mountain lion that was domesticated, and she was just like a house cat, just bigger. He goes, it just depends. He said, and there's good ones and there's bad ones. It's like that with animals. It's like that with people. It's like that with everything. And I know he's right about that because I've seen like Shark Week or whatever. I mean, I'm not a big fan of that, but I mean, I've seen some of the shows where people will get in there and touch these sharks, and there's sharks, I think, that are used to people. And that's fine, but I mean, you'll never see me doing that. Heck no, dude. I know that there was some guy that my friend was telling me about that had a crocodile that he swam with, and he said it's on YouTube. I've never actually looked it up. I saw something about it briefly on TV, but I can't give you the exact info, but I know that it exists. There's some sort of, because I've heard more than one person say it, a guy that would swim around with a crocodile, and he was friends with it for years and years and years. I don't know how that happens. I have no idea how that happens. But you got to figure, if somebody can befriend a bear, a cougar, a crocodile, and have a relationship with it, then why not one of these things, I guess? I don't know, man. I know this. My friend had 2 tarantulas. It wasn't really his. It was his girlfriend's. But they were tame. I mean, he would take them and play with them and whatever, but if you try to touch them or even move toward them, they would rear up and they'd scare the crap out of me. And he would take them out when we'd be hanging out, or whatever with friends, and he would like scare people with them. But they knew him. They knew him. They did, and they never bit him or anything. And he had their little cage or whatever it was, a little plastic thing, the aquarium that they sat in, and it was right on his headboard, above his head where he slept, dude. Oh God. And I'm just going like, are you crazy, Paul? That's just, oh man. I mean, that's just horrible to think about because I hate spiders. But it didn't bother him, and he said once or twice they got out and he would just pick them up and put them back in, and they were just as calm as Hindu cows with him. But to anybody else that just moved their hand toward them, they'd rear up with their big old fangs showing, and I'm like, oh, are you crazy? How can you trust that thing, But I guess it's the same principle. I don't know.
I know what you mean. It's hard to understand why anybody would want to sleep with two tarantulas up on their headboard like that. The idea of that makes the hair on my butt stand up.
I tell you what, dude. I don't know. I might rather deal with a dog man than a I really have arachnophobia, dude. Like, I do not like spiders. And I remember that last interview when me and you were talking, it got edited out. But there was a spider. Remember, I had to stop and kill it, dude. I was sitting there in my office doing the interview, and it's like there's a spider, and I had to stop. Do you remember that?
I do remember that.
Crazy. So, it's like, I mean, I'm laughing about it now, but it wasn't funny at the time. It was like, dude, and it wasn't that big, but to me, it might as well have been an African bird spider. It was small, but it was like, to me, any of them are giant tarantulas ready to eat me. I don't like them. There's certain things I'm afraid of. I don't like lightning. I don't like spiders. I don't like sharks. And I don't like dogmen. And even if this guy had one that was right there and he was like serving us dinner, I wouldn't trust it. You know what I mean? Sitting there being friendly and talking, I still wouldn't trust it because it's a wolf, dude.
I know exactly what you mean. Did Abel ever say how old Stripes would have been when he saw it that last time up on the ridge?
No, I didn't get a time on that. And that's also my fault, sloppy interviewing, because I was starting to get sleepy and I was starting to kind of nod at that point. And I really should have gotten a time because I tried to kind of piece it together and I just didn't get it. That would have been nice to know though. And that may be something that I get from him, maybe more information and maybe not enough for another show, but maybe I can give it to you and you can post it on the Dogman Facebook or however you want to do that. Maybe I can give you that information. Because he was in the middle of trying to tell me about an encounter he'd had, and I was falling asleep because he was at that point just talking, and I was so tired, and I apologize about that. God. I kicked myself. I should have stayed awake.
Oh, that's all right. Didn't do it on purpose. If you can get that info from him, that would be really good information to have, because if we could have an idea how long these things live, that'd be pretty valuable.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because to me, and I'm taking a guess here. I'll probably get all kinds of comments. This guy don't know what he's talking about. Well, I don't because I'm no expert. So I'm throwing that out there as a disclaimer here. I would think that their lifespan is probably like longer than a regular canine's, but shorter than a human's. Maybe.
I wouldn't be surprised. Your mom recently told you about something she had never shared with you before. What did she tell you?
Yes. I recently took my adopted son with me to Tomball, and we went to go visit my mother. And I call him my adopted son because he's my friend's son or whatever, and they don't speak, and he's been living with me for a long time. So I basically just call him my adopted son, and I've known him since he was a little bitty boy. But we went to go visit my mother, and she said something to us, and my friend Armando, that I'm really, really close with, he lives in Tomball, literally like right there close to my mother. And like I said, Armando's a Bigfoot researcher. And me and him talk about this stuff sometimes, and so he came over and we'd all eaten dinner and he came over and we were talking and he was telling my mom's friend, her son, who was asking questions about it. And Armando was telling them that he's kind of because he's retired military, that he's kind of a researcher, like an amateur researcher of Bigfoot. slash dog man like I am. I'm kind of a researcher too, like, amateur. It's not what I do for a living, but it's become kind of a hobby, I guess. I don't know. I really don't know what it is. It's just, I guess, like I said, a quest for answers. But my mother had said something to us that I had never heard her say before, ever, because she had heard my encounter. I told her when I was a teenager, and she never wanted to talk about it again for whatever reason. But she said that when she was growing up, that she had always heard stories about werewolves in my hometown. Now, in my hometown, they call them werewolves. They don't call them wolves. They don't call them dogman. I don't even know what a dogman is. They call them werewolves. And like I said, there was a couple stories that I had heard, and we didn't want to get into those because they were a little weird. But my mother said that when she was growing up, there was a creek down behind where she grew up called Mustang Creek. And on the other side of that, she would hear like weird howls at night. And her brothers and sisters would hear it. And people believed that these things were werewolves and that they existed in and around my town. Now, I'm not saying that the one I saw was a werewolf as a person transforming, because I didn't see any kind of transformation. I still have never heard of anybody actually seeing that. But that's what she said. She said that all her life she had heard stories of werewolves. And I thought that was funny because my mother had never spoken up about that. She had never said that before, but she was comfortable enough with me and Armando there that she told us that. And I thought that was interesting because she finally admitted, that she knew about these things. Because for years, she just wouldn't talk about it. She just didn't even acknowledge it. She would just make a face whenever it came up or anything, and so at least she's leveling with me on that, and so that was interesting.
I wish she would have told you about that a long time ago instead of holding out on you.
Yeah, and until the thing happened to me, and like she told me, she said until that it happened to me, she really didn't believe in it. She just thought that it was stories. But once you hear enough encounters and enough stories from one area, you start to think, well, there's got to be something to that. Where there's smoke, there's fire, right? I mean, enough people have encounters and enough people see these things. It's not fiction, dude. It's got to be something to it, When me and Armando had talked about the guys from the ranch or whatever, I believe these guys. I really do, because it would be hard to get all these guys together to collaborate on a big lie to me, to get them to all be like, oh, okay, you tell him this. We're going to get this sucker. He's going to believe all this. And what are we gaining out of that? You know what I mean? I just want to gather as much information and knowledge as possible. And I think that these things are cryptid, just like I think Bigfoot is. And I think at some point we're going to have to come to terms with these things exist in our world. They're real. And people go out there and you might run into some raccoons or coyotes or hogs or whatever, but you may run into one of these things too. And anybody who thinks that they're safe out in the woods because they got their gun, you're deluding yourself, dude. Noah's opinion about, oh, I got my gun with me, I ain't worried, whatever, and that's going to keep you safe. Well, that's your blanket. In Spanish, we say cocha. You got your little security blanket and you think that it's going to keep you safe. Well, that may give you peace of mind, but peace of mind is not going to save your life. So
I don't care how big of a gun you've got. At any time out in the woods, these things could take you out at will, so that's no protection. A woman recently told you about a dogman that came into her house. What happened to her?
And like we talked about earlier, Vic, there's people that have contacted me, and I, for the most part, don't mind it at all. I don't always have time to answer everybody. I know there's a lot of you guys out there listening that have sent me friend requests, things like that, and I don't always have a chance to, because I have a lot of things I have to deal with in my life. And don't be offended if I don't respond. I try to answer as many people as I can. But I did get to make friends with a couple of people through this whole research that I've been doing. And one of them, I'll call her Natalie. But Natalie told me this story that was pretty interesting. She had 2 dogman encounters, and one in particular, she lives out in the Mojave Desert. And so she said that one day, one of these things came through the back door of her house and went into her room and was just sitting there looking at her and her 2 siblings, and they were just staring at it, and they stared at it, and it stared at them. And eventually she told her sister, like she whispered to one of her sisters, she's like, we have to scream, and they were counting to 3, and then they didn't scream, and then it just sat there just staring at him, ears twitching, just looking at him, weird face. The way she described it was just the terrifying visage of this thing. So finally they screamed at the same time, all of them, and then it turned and bolted out the door. Just crazy, a crazy story. And then she said years later when she was like, I think she said she was like 8 or 9 when that happened. And then she said that when she was 17, she saw 2 of these things again. And it was just her and a group of friends, and that they were up on this ridge, and they saw 2 of them cross the highway together, and they were both black, just like the first one she had seen. It was black. And she said that the 2 that crossed the highway, one was a good few inches taller than the other one. And she said that she thought it was a male and a female. When she was telling me this, of course, she was real nervous. She was afraid that I was going to think she was crazy or say something. And I'm like, you've heard me on Vic's show talking about all this stuff. I put myself out there to be, if somebody wants to think I'm nuts or they want to hurl whatever at me, I'm open because I'm sitting here telling these stories. I said, do you think I'm going to judge you for that? So anyway, that was her encounter. It's just pretty crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy stuff. It's bad enough having an encounter out in the woods, but when they come into your house and stand at the threshold of your bedroom, that takes it to a whole new level.
Yeah, and that's something that has come up again and again in stories that I've heard. Like, I'm not going to get into the story, but, there was the story from the girl from Serbia that I had told you about. For some reason, there's a lot of reports out of that region. I don't know what it is. I don't know why that is, but there was a girl from Serbia that had one in her bedroom, and it's weird, dude. I can't imagine being in my house. I couldn't be close quarters with one of these things. I'd probably just lose my mind. I'd probably be insane the rest of my life. You would never be able to get anything out of me ever again, because that would be the end of it for me. I'd be in an asylum or something if I had to be in close quarters with one of these things, And I'm not going to tell you, if I had something with me to kill it, I would try. I'm not going to sit there and stare at this thing. I'm going to try, and I'll probably end up dead or something, but I would definitely not just sit there and wait for it to do what it wants to do. But I think it goes back to what Noah and Abel were saying, that these things are ambush predators, and that if you see them face to face, there's a good chance they're not going to do anything. He goes, but it's when they walk into the woods that you need to get out of there, because they'll probably try to flank you or double back on you. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. Well, it's about time for us to get out of here. Josh, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Just like I'd said in the last interview, it's not a game going out in the woods and looking for these things. And when people hear about these things, the people who've never seen these things, they're like, well, I'm going to go look and I'm going to find one, or I'm going to shoot one even. And the level of stupidity is just, like I said before, it astounds me. And I just encourage people to stay away from these people's property that have these problems, because they don't want you on their property. They don't want you getting hurt or killed for sure. And, these people that deal with these things, they deal with it because they've been dealing with it for decades. The average person who's never seen one of these things is not equipped mentally, physically, emotionally to confront one of these things and deal with it. And I had this woman out in Oregon that, like I said, she had a very similar story she had told me, where she had acclimated some Bigfoot, or Sasquatch as they call them up there in the Northwest, to her family, and that they knew her. And I had heard the same kind of story, this woman not near Kerrville, which is west of San Antonio. The same thing, where she knew these Bigfoot and they're friendly or whatever. I have heard that way, way more than I have this Dogman thing. I have never heard of this before. This is the first time I've ever heard anybody, even a story where these things were acclimated to people or habituated to people. And so the average person trying to wrap their mind around this thing and defend itself or whatever, I mean, there's no way to prepare you for that. And so I just hope that what I'm telling people don't make them go, wow, I just want to go out there and see these things and then end up getting killed, and then that be on my conscience that something happens to them, they disappear. So I'm asking everybody, please be cautious when you're going out into the woods. Be careful. Please don't go out there and try to fight with one of these things or shoot at it or anything like that. If you see one, just back away as slow as you can. Do whatever you got to do to defend yourself, but don't antagonize the situation. And I guess that's all I want is just people to be safe. I don't want anybody getting hurt. And that's one thing that I kind of wrestled with was I just don't want anything bad to come of my words. You know what I'm saying, Vic?
I do know what you're saying. I hope no one listening to the show tries to do that too. Yeah, that wouldn't be a wise move. Well, thanks again for coming back on the show, Josh. You know, I appreciate it so much.
I'm always happy to talk to you, Vic. You know, like I said, we're friends, and it's always fun to talk to you, even about other stuff, not just Dogman. You know, you're a fun guy to talk to. And I'm glad to see your show's doing well, you know. I still, to this day, have not listened to all the episodes, but I'm definitely planning on doing that and just sitting down and having a marathon to try to catch up, man. I haven't, I'm so far behind right now. But I always refer people to, and they try to tell me their encounters. I said, well, you need to tell Vic because he's going to give you the platform to say what you have to say. You did that for me. You were the first one to get me to come on. I've had others request since then, and I politely tell them no. You know, a couple people got a little ruffled feathers, whatever. But I'm loyal, and like I said, if I have any stories, I'm bringing them to you first. You'll be the one that has them. So that's all I have to say about that.
Well, thanks for saying the things you just said, and thanks for doing the things you do. You know, I appreciate it. Have a great night.
All right, you too, Vic.
Thanks again. We'll see ya.
Bye.
Bye. Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had an encounter of your own and would like to speak with me whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Tonight's guest is Jay. Jay, welcome to the show.
Hey, Vic.
Jay, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Okay. I grew up part of my life in Tennessee and the other part in Florida. Went in the Army when I was 17. I got out of the Army in the mid-90s and wound up going to work overseas for a contractor. Worked overseas for about 10 years and came back to the States and decided to go to engineering school at the university, and that's how I wound up back in Florida in Gainesville.
We were talking about all the things you've done in your life. You're younger than I am, and I was sitting there listening to you talk about all the things that you have done, and I'm thinking, wow, this man here, he's lived his life. You've done so many impressive things.
Well, that or a really good liar.
Oh, that's funny. Before we talk about the encounter you and your wife had, please tell the listeners about the conversation you overheard when you were a kid growing up in Tennessee that has possible ties to a dog man.
Okay. we discussed this earlier and didn't cross my mind until you brought up some issues in that area. When I was growing up, this was the early 80s. I do remember my grandfather and father having a conversation. I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and I do remember specifically it involving what they said was a bear attack on a couple that was in an RV. And it must have been bad. And this was brought up, the discussion was between my father and grandfather, so I know something happened. Now, exactly what they were talking about, I don't know, but it just seems kind of odd how they were discussing this about the same time that something that supposedly did happen up in that area. But they always said bear attack, not dogman, not anything else. It's specifically bear attack.
For the listeners, so that you know, the area where he grew up was pretty close to the LBL, so apparently that's the area where they're talking about this quote-unquote bear attack happening. That's pretty eerie. After you had your encounter, did you hear about anyone else having encounters with dogmen in the area where your encounter happened?
In Florida, not after. I did do a little research, and I had never heard of dogman or anything like this in my life. And I didn't really know what this thing was, what to even be searching for. Naturally, the size, I'm thinking Sasquatch or Bigfoot, something that big, but I knew it didn't look like what you would expect a Sasquatch to look like, but that was the only, I guess, reference I had to even start looking for things like this. So I did do a search on, I believe it was BFRO. I think that was the name of the organization that records sightings of Sasquatch. And for that part of Florida, there had only been 3 Sasquatch sightings. One was very far out in the prairie, which is 30-some miles from where we lived on the other end of Gainesville. And there was one, however, in 1985 that had been reported by a psychology professor about 200 yards from the ranch. He didn't describe it in great detail. He didn't get a great look at it. Did he see a Sasquatch? Did he see what we've seen? I don't know. But he's seen something really big, and it was broad daylight when he seen it. So it did kind of make the hair on the back of my neck stand up when I found this report. And this was, mind you, 20-some years earlier than when we had seen what we seen that evening. So there has been a history of things being seen in the area. However, prior to us seeing this, a truck driver who was driving for Conway in the area, this man had been maybe 15, 20 miles up the road from the ranch late at night. I believe it was after midnight, picking up, I believe it was a natural gas shipment, or it may have been a 6-oil shipment. I'm not sure which one, but it was gas and it was dangerous stuff. And they obviously stored it, they have a depot out there and store it outside of city limits, but he had to go out and he had to pick up a shipment there. And it was very late. He had to wait for the depot manager to come and I guess let him in and fill up the truck or whatever. And on his way into that facility, it's on the periphery, I guess, of the Okefenokee Wildlife Refuge, this big swamp and wooded area out there. And on the way into the depot, he seen something very large. He said bipedal leap across the road in front of him. He thought he had hallucinated and had pulled his truck into the depot, and he was sitting there waiting. And he said he had his window down, was having a cigarette or whatever, was waiting for the depot manager to show up. And he said he heard what he described was the most god-awful roar, like yell. He said he didn't know any animal itself that could have made a sound like that. He said when he heard that, he rolled the windows up. He said, and I do remember him saying specifically he would not have felt safe if he had had a machine gun. And he was very upset when the, depot manager showed up to let him in, and depot manager didn't want to be there. Just, there was something weird going on in the area. Obviously he'd seen it. When he told me this story, I kind of giggled about it and didn't take it too seriously, even though it's coming from somebody that otherwise is a pretty serious person and wouldn't make stories like that up. But I thought maybe he just misidentified something. I thought maybe it's a bear and maybe thinks he heard this or whatever. But after what me and my wife seen, I started thinking back on that as well, thinking, that's pretty close. Maybe he's seen the same thing we've seen.
Yeah, it's possible. And I'll bet he was upset when he was sitting there waiting for that depot manager to come. That had to be the longest wait of his life.
Oh yeah, that was one of the things he said. I mean, he did say he wouldn't have felt safe with a machine gun, but he made it clear that they weren't allowed to carry firearms anyways with them in the trucks. So, you know, he's completely defenseless. He said he didn't even have a pocket knife.
That had to be awfully hard to deal with. All right, Jay, let's talk about this encounter you had. Please give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay, this was in the beginning of April 2010, so it was early spring. We had been living on the ranch. We'd been brought in there while I was in school at the university. We'd been brought in by the family that owned the ranch. They brought us in to kind of keep an eye on the place. They had problems with poachers and other things like this. And it was a big ranch. That was their method of, I guess, maintaining the place. They only gave the house to people that were either law enforcement or people that were in the military or had been prior in the military and had security experience. So the couple that were living in the ranch house prior to us had moved out. It had been a deputy sheriff and his wife, who was in medical school. They did move from the ranch. So we had moved in there, been living there maybe a little over a month, and everything was going fine. We would walk my wife's dog. It was a Schnauzer little dog. I couldn't just let it out the door because there were coyotes out there, bobcats. There's lots of hogs, things like this, and this is a small dog that's going to run off. So we had to keep him on a leash, and every evening after dinner before we went to bed, I would take the dog, put him on a leash, and I'd walk him along the cattle fence right in front of our house, maybe 25 feet from the house, and just walk him along the fence line and let him do his business, and we would come back inside. So that is where we had our encounter. We'd been eating dinner and walked out the front door. I believe I was in front of my wife. Matter of fact, I know I was, but we did let the screen door slam. I was real good about that, so I made the noise, usually scare off, you know, anything that might otherwise attack you out of fear, you know, bobcats, stuff like that. I made a loud noise, usually to scare that kind of stuff off. So we did slam the screen door. We're coming down the steps, and my wife was behind me, but we got up to the fence line. I carried, at that time, 1 million lumen Coleman, like mini lantern, you know, spotlight type deal. I carried it and used it while I was walking the dog, you know, just checking the woods, you know, keep an eye out for anything. So I carried that as well as a 45 in a shoulder holster, and, you know, that was kept, you know, just for security reasons. Again, we did have poachers out there. There had also been an order to kill any hogs on site. They were causing a lot of damage on the ranch and some of the farming area. So, you know, those orders were there as well. So I did carry it for that reason. But anyways, we were walking the dog up in front of the house, and I was talking to my wife over my shoulder. And I don't know why, I just clicked the button on the spotlight and kind of fanned it to the right of me. And when I fanned it over in that direction, that's when we seen it. It was right there. I mean, I could not believe what I was seeing. It was, you know, less than 50 feet from us. It was standing by the large oak tree and the flower bed that sat on the right side of the house over there. It was standing right next to that. The light caught it dead on, right in the face. I didn't know how to process what I was seeing. The head, it was the biggest head that I thought I had ever seen on any living thing, you know, in my life, up close and in person. The eyes, I mean, the eyes were just shooting, you know, right at me. It was unbelievable. They were a orange yellow color, real deep. And, I remember, you know, kind of, again, trying to figure out, what do I do? You know, in my head, what is this? I screamed back at my wife. She's behind me, and I said, "Are you seeing this?" And she says, "Yes, I'm seeing it." And she's starting to cry, you know, not cry, but she's, you know, startled, and she's crying back, "Yes, let's get inside now," you know, and she's done took off running back to the front porch. And I'm backing up, but I'm keeping the light on it while I'm backing up with the dog, trying to get back to the porch. I mean, going for the 45, that didn't even cross my mind. This thing was so big that the last thing I was thinking about at that point was my ability to shoot it. It was so close. I didn't think I could have got the 45 out, in time to shoot the thing anyways. And as I just knew, keep the light on it, back up. I'm terrified at what I'm seeing. And as I'm backing up, the thing starts, this is what scared me to death. The thing crouches down on two legs. As big as it was, crouches down, and it's focused right on me the whole time. So I finally get to the porch. I slam the screen door, lock it, not that it would have done any good. My wife's already inside. I get inside and I start screaming at her. I turn off all of the lights. The house we lived in was an antique farmhouse that had been put on that property 30 years before, I don't know. And it had been renovated. That was part of the deal when we moved in, is we couldn't add anything or do anything inside the house because it wasn't antique. All the glass was antique, which was bad because the glass is paper thin, but I believe we counted 16 windows in the house. So, when you're living out on a ranch and there's nobody around you for several miles, you just got woods. You don't really care about your privacy too much. But for this evening, it was really scary because the whole house was just ringed in windows. And it was these flimsy, antique windows. There were no blinds to pull, no drapes, no nothing. So I get inside and I just start screaming at my wife. I'm like, cut all the lights off. She's like, what? I said, shut every light off. I'm going into defensive mode here, like we're under attack. And I start panicking a little, but try to keep myself calm. And we start flipping the lights on. I screamed at my wife. I said, get the floodlights in the back that been cut on. We had a total of 8 floodlights that ringed the house. There were 2 floodlights on each corner of the home, and they were 150 watts. So we had her cut on the back floodlights. So I cut on the floodlights in the front. And at that point, I'm trying to fumble around in the dark, just clicking the trigger on the light, trying to get to my shotgun and get my M4 Type AR-15 out, and I'm trying to get them loaded. I kept number 4 buckshot tactical loads and the shotgun out there for rattlesnakes. We had a lot of rattlesnakes, and there was a possibility that I'd go run off a poacher or something. That's what I took. I knew what I seen, that wasn't going to do it. I get a box of double-aught buck and some slugs, and I start loading that in the shotgun. And even that, I would have been afraid shooting at this thing with that at too far of a range. I got my AR-15 out. I got a little light on it hooked up, and I did get a magazine in, and I felt a little more comfort because I assumed at that point, okay, we're inside. If it is coming for us, it's going to be coming from the light to the dark. I've got the dark on my side, and if it does manage to get into a window, while it's getting into the window, I thought at least with, the M4, if I can pop it a few times right in the head, that should put it down regardless of how big it is. That was my thinking at that moment. So my wife's crying at this point. She has started crying actually. And, she's freaking out. I want to leave. And I knew, that was a bad idea. We had 3/4 of a mile to drive to get back up to the main gate. And then we had a security gate that would take, a good 30 seconds to open itself. Obviously something this big, we weren't going to outrun it in the car, trying to get in the car and get away. We had even had, deputy sheriffs in the past that had come out on the ranch for other things, make that comment about how far back we were. So I knew we weren't getting out of there in the car that night, and we were just going to have to wait it out and sit. So I'm trying to calm her down, and we, like I said, got all the lights off inside, and we just sat there. We knew where it was standing. It had been standing over at that large oak tree, and I believe that it had been watching us that evening through that window, eating dinner. It knew, it knew we were coming outside. It heard us. It wasn't afraid. It didn't try to run off. It had actually been standing there watching us. So anyways, we sat there in the dark for the rest of the evening, and we did not, or I didn't feel comfortable until the sun started coming up a little after 5 in the morning. Once lights started breaking, I waited until I could see well enough out there, and I went back out on the porch and started looking around. I wanted to see if I could, I could see the thing still there. Obviously, at this point, it was gone. But it was a long night. That went from, probably 9:30, 10 o'clock till after 5 a.m. the next morning. So, it was a long night of sitting there. You know this thing's out there and you can't see it. It was an experience that really did change me.
I think that would change anyone, and I'll bet that was a long night. Wow. You think that dog man was waiting for you to get further from your house before it made a move on you? Why do you think that?
Well, I think it had been watching us, and it may have been watching us prior to that night. It may have been watching us for days prior to this, and knew the routine, knew what we were doing, and it knew I was walking the dog down that fence line. So if I had walked up just, maybe 30, 40 more feet from where I was at when I hit it, if I had walked straight up the fence line like I normally do, because I would walk that section of the fence. The cattle fences, we have the pastures and parts of the forest off in grids. So I would walk this one grid line of fence, and where it was at that tree, if I'd walked 30 more feet up that fence line like I normally did with the dog, it would have been at a 90-degree angle, a 90-degree angle to me, and I wouldn't have seen it at all, and it could have just snatched near the dog right there, and I would have not seen what was coming. It would have been that close and at that kind of an angle. So it's definitely a place where, if I was in the Army, that's where I'd expect an ambush. So, to me, it screamed ambush. And, after talking with you, think maybe that's not what it was doing, but it's what it appeared to me. Strictly from, a tactical point of view, it appeared to me like it was waiting for an ambush.
Ew. When you and your wife were looking at that dog man, what was your dog doing, do you know?
Dog didn't make a noise, didn't bark, and I've got a shepherd. Growing up as a kid, we had Rhodesian Ridgebacks. I've been a dog person my whole life, so I know what the type of dogs make noise, and all schnauzers are the type of dogs that bark a lot. And my wife's dog, it was a real pain in the neck sometimes with how much barking it would do. It would bark at anything, and the slightest little noise or smell or whatever, and, it set it off. But it did not bark, didn't make a sound. It acted probably more confused than we were. I remember when I was pulling it with the leash, it was expecting to go do its business, and it didn't get to go on its normal walk. So I'm having to pull them as I'm going backwards back up to the porch. The dog did not make a sound.
Well, you never really know how a dog's going to react. Sometimes dogs will go nuts, absolutely apoplectic. Other times they cower and don't make a sound, so you never really do know how they're going to respond.
He did mark his territory on the porch. This would drive us nuts. When he would smell other animals getting around the area, he would go and he would pee on the corners. The porch was a big tongue-and-groove wood plank porch that ran 360 degrees around the house. This was an antique cracker house. That's what they call them down here, cracker homes. And the dog would pee on all four corners of the porch deliberately, for that reason. But no, he did not make any noise or do anything like that night.
I'm glad he didn't go nuts. Did the dogman ever seem to notice your dog was there?
He would have had to. He was watching me and the dog. That's the thing. I think this thing was waiting in ambush. That's what it appeared to me to be doing. I think it had probably seen me walking the dog prior to this, so it definitely knew the dog was there.
Oh, I'm sure it knew it was there, but sometimes people have a dog with them and the dogman's just locked on the person, not the dog, so I didn't know when all this was going on if the dogman ever glanced at the dog from what you saw or if it just stayed locked on you.
All I seen was the eyes, and the eyes were focused right on, obviously it was focused on me because I had the spotlight, but, it felt like it's staring right into my eyes.
Yeah, that's pretty typical. You were amazed by the size of it. How big was that dog man?
Uh, hard to say. I've heard the 7-foot tall reports. I don't know. It's over 6 foot. This thing was really big and, just massive. Best way to describe it. Where it was standing at that tree, the tree is raised up slightly on a little hill. So there is a depression right behind the tree, and that's where, the dog man was standing when we seen it. So from what me and my wife judged, it looked like it had to be well over 6 feet tall.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was. How good of a look did you get at its leg structure?
Not a good look. That's the one thing. I know it was bipedal. It had to be. Nothing that big on 4 legs. It had to be bipedal because when it crouched, it was a real crouch. It looked like a big person start to crouch down, but a lot of the legs were blocked from view because, again, there was a slight depression behind the tree, and I guess I was slanted downwards towards it, and there was that slight depression, and then, there was some flower bushes around the tree, and that did block portions below the thigh area, I guess.
Okay, that makes sense. Your dog Nora was outside with you one night recently. That caused you and your wife to talk about the dogman you saw. What did you talk about?
Yeah, this was prior to me contacting you. Me and my wife had not ever discussed in detail the dimensions of this thing that we seen. We just didn't do it. We would always kind of, that thing we seen, nervously and brush it off. And I'd never really grilled her on it because I knew it scared her so bad that I didn't want to upset her usually in the conversation. But we were out back, and Nora, our German Shepherd, was out in the yard, and, she's maybe 15, 20 feet from us the other night. And we had the back porch light on, and you could catch some of the eye shine from Nora. At that distance, you got the outline of the head and everything else. And I went ahead and brought it up to my wife, and I said, that thing we've seen. Of course, she already, I don't want to talk about it. I'm like, well, I've been wondering how big you would say that head was compared to Nora's head. Because secretly, I had already made the determination that what I seen had to be at least 3 times the size of our German Shepherd's head. That's how big it was. But I didn't want to say that to her, so I just told her, I said, do you think that it was bigger than her head 2 times maybe? And she said, oh, no. It was at least 2.5 times, maybe even bigger. So I knew when she said that, yeah, we definitely seen the same thing. It wasn't a hallucination. It was huge, and it was probably about that size, about 3 times the size of German Shepherd's head.
That's awfully big. What feature did the dogman have that shook you up most?
I'm going to say head. The head and the eyes. Those 2 features together. It was, the head was massive. It was predator's head. The eyes were, I don't know, there was something supernatural about the eye shine. They weren't glowing in the dark or anything, but when that Coleman spotlight hit it there, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. I've eye shined deer, cows, hogs, you name it. I've seen eye shine from everything. I can identify animal eye shine pretty well. Bears, bobcats, anything in that area. Coyotes, you catch their eye shine. There's nothing like that. And that was the unsettling thing to me, was the eyes.
Yeah, their eyes will leave an impression on you. What color did you say that dogman was?
That was the thing, because I was so scared when I seen it that you second guess yourself about what you're seeing. And I had never been certain. I knew it was dark. I knew it was a dark color. I thought, could it possibly have had some brown splintered in there? You're trying to find some way to rationalize what you're seeing. But I knew it was dark, and I secretly thought it was gray. When me and my wife started discussing it, she got a better look at it than I did at that point when she had to go back up into the house on the porch. Well, I still had it illuminated with a spotlight. She's going in the door, so she got a much better look at the actual color. Had time to process it all, maybe. She described a similar thing. Gray is what it was, a dark gray color.
More so than gray, they're reported as being black in color, but people ask what color dogmen can be, and I always tell them it would appear they can be any color a timber wolf can be, so it really runs the gamut.
This wasn't gray like a timber wolf. It was a dark gray. That's why we were saying we're having trouble with deciding, could it have possibly been black? I thought maybe it's brown. Would brown do that? But no, it was a dark gray. Very dark.
Well, with those lighting conditions, it's going to be hard to know for sure what color it was, so that's understandable. When you, your wife, and your dog made it back into the house, was your dog going nuts, or was she pretty calm?
The dog was confused. It wasn't barking. I don't remember it going crazy or anything like that. Maybe growling, and it might have been, it was a grouchy dog. Ben was a good dog, but he was kind of grouchy. He was maybe growling at us for dragging him in. I don't know. As far as barking at whatever was out there, no, it wasn't doing that.
That's good. I'm glad he stayed calm. You believe the previous tenants of that ranch had seen that dog man too. Why do you think that?
Well, when we got brought in, we'd read the rules, what the owners expected, the security did, all that. I had asked because we were responsible for paying for the utilities, something we had to pay for. And I remember asking them utility price. In that part of Florida, in the city, utilities were very expensive. But if you went just outside the city limits in the county area, a lot of Florida is covered by Florida Power and Light, and their rates are a lot cheaper. This was a separate company, however, that was providing utilities in that area. So I asked them about the utility bill, and they told us. And, it wasn't very high compared to what we had already been paying in the city, but it's still pretty high. And, I said, wow, that's not as cheap as I thought it was going to be. And the owner said, well, that deputy sheriff and his wife, he would be gone in the evenings, and she refused to sleep out there without the floodlights on each corner of the house. The time when he told me that, I kind of giggled, and thought, well, what are they doing out here to begin with? If she's that afraid of, the dark, they don't need to be on a cattle ranch out in the middle of nowhere with nobody around them. It didn't really cross my mind until after we seen this thing, and I really started thinking about it again. This was somebody that had finished medical school and I believe was in residency at that time. This was a medical doctor and a deputy sheriff that probably had a lot of experience living out, in sticks themselves, or else they wouldn't took the house to begin with. This is a rational, scientifically minded woman. I really found it hard to believe that they were wanting to pay that kind of money to have those floodlights on, and you just wouldn't do that unless there was something else going on. And after we seen this thing that evening, it hit me, they had probably seen this thing as well, and that's probably why they left. It was run 8 times 150 watts. You run 8 floodlights all night long. That can start running you some pretty serious electric bills, which is not what you want when you're in medical school. So I would say she was doing it for a reason, and I believe personally that was the reason.
Yeah, if you have that many lights out there, that will make your meter spin.
Yeah.
Did you ever try to contact them to see if they actually had seen it?
No, I wouldn't have dared done something like that at that time.
If you would have contacted them, who's to say they wouldn't have denied it anyway, even if they had?
If someone had asked me and my wife during that time, we would have as well. We would not have admitted what we've seen.
Yeah, a lot of people would have done it that way. Did you ever tell the landlord about what you had seen that night?
No, that was part of the reason why we kept our mouth shut for 6 years and didn't say anything. This is a very well-known family, especially in that part of the state, but statewide, involved in politics and other things. I would have not wanted any repercussions if they thought we were crazy or causing them problems. So the last thing that I would have done is told them exactly what we've seen. I believe at that time it would not have been good for my career, my wife's career. I just wouldn't have wanted that floating around from them. It wouldn't have been a good idea.
Yeah, I can see why you didn't share it then. After having that experience, you did several things to try and protect yourselves. What kinds of things did you do?
after the first night, we knew that no one would believe a word we said if we told them what we'd seen. They'd swear to God that, we had lost our minds or else we'd misseen something. And I knew we hadn't misseen anything. And I was terrified. This thing appeared to be stalking our home, and it's coming right up to that tree. And that blind spot, it was just outside the range of the floodlights from the corners of the house. So I got the idea. I thought, okay, we'll go and we'll get some staked floodlights. These are, little floodlights you can stake, push down on the ground on a stake and run an electrical cord. And you can click them on in the evening. I thought, you know what, I'll light up that tree in that bush area. And that way, if this thing tries to come back up, or if I think there's something up in the area, I'll just flip the lights on. And, I should be able to see pretty clear. At that point, there's floodlights down there. So we bought that. We did buy some camera equipment, some security camera equipment. We had set that up because I thought, it'd be better to be recording all the perimeter around the house, everything going on here in the evenings. And, this was going to be our only way to prove to anybody that something was going on. This is what we've seen. We've got it on video. I was convinced that I could do that. So I went and got all of the stuff the following day. And, we did have kind of a eyebrow raised when we were picking up some of the video equipment. And, one of the people there mentioned, well, what are you guys so afraid of? And you can't tell them. And, this pretty well, I think I'm going to keep watching the news, maybe, they'll see some of your video on the news, making jokes like, what did you see? Did you see Sasquatch? I don't know why the person was doing that, but anyways, we got back. I did get those lights set up, and that was Saturday afternoon. We'd seen this as a Friday night, so Saturday afternoon, and it had to be Sunday evening. Saturday they were fine. I'd flip them on and you could see the lights there at the tree, and it lit the whole tree area, the bush area, all that stuff lit up, several of those halogen lights. Sunday evening, I went to flip those lights on and I couldn't see them. I was kind of like, what? Where did my lights go? Cable's connected to the outlet, everything's set up the way it's supposed to be from my end in the house, but this was pretty late at that point when I flipped the light switch to see if they would come on, and I didn't see them. So obviously, being that recent that we had seen this thing just a couple nights before at a tree, the last thing I was going to do was go back out around that tree, and try to figure out what's wrong with the lights. I thought, well, I'll just wait. Those light bulbs, maybe they're cheap and burned out. I'll see tomorrow morning. So Monday morning, my wife got up and I got her off to work. And before I had to go to do my stuff, I went out there and started looking around the tree. Cable's there, everything's there. Right up in the tree, one of the lights had been pulled up, stake and all. It had been pulled up out of the ground and just tossed to the side. The other light, somebody or something, because it had to be something with a hand, loosened the bolt where you adjust the angle of the light and adjusted the light to where it shone straight up into the air. So basically got rid of the light shining directly into that tree area. Now, there was nobody out there. The lights were working earlier in the evening. I go to flick it on later before I go to bed and they're not working again. If it had been a human being, that would have been a very stupid, dangerous thing to do. They know they have police officers or professional security people that live in this house, the same at the other end of the ranch, another police officer that lives in the house. These poachers aren't that dumb, is what I'm saying. If they're going out there to poach game or something, that's one thing. That's what they're going to do. They're not going to come up around somebody's home that they sure know is armed and start playing games like that at 11, 12 o'clock at night. That's a guaranteed way to, as I said to my wife before, it's a guaranteed way to win a Darwin Award. You're going to get shot doing something like that. So I don't believe it was a person that did this, but it had to be something with a hand, something loosened that bolt and tilted that light straight up into the air. And even if you work it out in your head and say, well, it could have been some other animal, the other light was just yanked up out of the ground and tossed to the side. That could have been anything. Anything with a mouth and bite on something and pull it up out of the ground, fine. But whatever did this, it had to have loosened that light and tilted it straight up in the air. And why would it do that? It's almost like it's wanting you to know, somebody's wanting you to know, or something's wanting you to know that what you're doing isn't going to deter it.
That is so creepy. That's pretty bad. You asked a Forestry Service employee if he knew anything about what you had seen. What did he have to say?
We had cowboys on the ranch that worked cattle, and the Forestry Service, they ran a little program out there, you know, in the forested areas of the ranch. It's a big ranch for that area. And they'd every now and then bring forestry students from the university out there to do class work or whatever they do in the forest. I don't know. And I knew, the forestry guy that ran all that stuff out there. He had shown up one afternoon with another gentleman. And, I, again, did not want to tell anybody exactly what we've seen, but I knew he had been in the woods a lot on this ranch and around the area, and I was hoping maybe he had seen something himself big, maybe he'd seen anything that could have explained what we've seen, or maybe a very large bear for this area or something like that. That's what I'm thinking. So I'm talking with him and trying to get him to tell me if he'd seen anything, and it was pretty clear he hadn't himself seen nothing. He kind of ridiculed it, you know, well, what did you see? You know, I said, well, I don't know what I seen. It was pretty, you know, just something pretty big. You know, I started telling him about the floodlights, what had happened over by the tree, and he didn't really say anything himself about it, but the person who was with him said, well, you know, maybe it was a monkey, you know, which it ticked me off when the person said that. First, I'm thinking, you know, you're making fun of me. No, you know, back in the 20s and 30s, there was some really wealthy people that lived in this area, and they had their own little private airfields, and they'd bring in all these exotic animals, and they'd turn them loose. So it was something that was known in the area that this had happened in the past. And he's saying, well, maybe it was just a monkey that, you know, got loose and then breeding out there. I'm like, no, this wasn't a monkey. But no, they hadn't said anything. And the forestry guy, again, this is somebody who's not been in combat. He's never been, you know, within 3,000 miles of anything really dangerous in his life, but spends his whole life in the forest and thinks he knows everything. And, you know, he kind of got on to me and he's like, well, what's the problem? You know, you had a spotlight, you had a gun, you just shine it down and walk it down, you know, walk up on it. And I knew when he said that, you know, this man had never seen anything like what we've seen that evening. Because the absolute last thing I would have done was walk this thing down, and he wouldn't have either. And neither would anybody else making such a stupid comment like that. So after that one, I just dropped it and didn't bring it up with anybody else, because I knew if I started questioning too many people about this, somehow it would get out there and people would start saying, well, these guys are seeing things, something's wrong with them. So I dropped it at that point, didn't say another word to him. Did talk with the cowboy about it, the head cowboy out there, but again, didn't tell him exactly what we've seen either.
These experiences are always so hard to talk about. It's a shame.
Yeah, it is.
One night, a little more than a week after you had that encounter, you were on your porch when you heard something that made the hair in the back of your neck stand up. What did you hear?
This is probably about 3 a.m. in the morning. I was in engineering school at the time, studying aerospace engineering, and you do a lot of late nights, and I was working in a couple of labs at that point, and I had a lot of work, so you'd work all night. My wife went to bed hours earlier, and I was sitting at the table doing the stuff. It had been raining pretty hard, and, you know, when it was raining outside, you know, you couldn't go out and really take a cigarette coffee break or anything like that. You get splashed even through the screen, you know, the water would get you all wet. So it stopped raining, and I thought, well, it's after 3, I'll go take a break and go have another cup of coffee and cigarette and come in and wrap everything up for the evening. And I walked out there, and the forest, you know, right after it rains, it smells real good, and, you know, the forest is real quiet. You don't hear any noise or anything, and just real peaceful. Skies have cleared up a little bit, and sitting there having a cigarette, and then all of a sudden I heard it. I mean, the noise, it was so loud, so close. I mean, just a few, I know exactly where it happened. It's just a few hundred yards, off into the wood line behind the house. The hogs, something was getting the group of wild hogs that was out there and infested that land. And whatever it was tearing them to pieces. I mean, this sounded like a slaughter, the noise they were making. And I've grown up in the woods and mountains my whole life, been around, wild animals and, domesticated animals. And I never heard anything like that just randomly happen, in nature. And it scared me to death. I mean, I immediately put the cigarette down, and this went on for, I'd say a good 30 seconds or so, the noise. And then everything went dead silent. Another noise, at least from the hogs. And then shortly after that, I heard, all I can describe it is like the extremely loud groaning yell. I mean, that's the best way I can think of to describe it. It was not a coyote sound or anything like what you would expect a wolf to make, I guess is what I'm saying. We had coyotes out there and you'd hear them yapping all the time in the evenings. Definitely wasn't a cat. I mean, I know even mountain lions, for example, or here in Florida they call them panthers. They don't make noises like that. I've heard them before in my life when I was a kid. They sound like women screaming. A completely different thing. Not a bear. Whole different noise there as well. I don't know what this was. I mean, the noise, but it was that loud, and I just knew deep down that this was that thing that it seemed. That was the noise it was making. It had just, I guess, slaughtered that group of hogs out there when they put that down. And I mean, the hair on the back of my neck was standing up, literally. It was that terrifying. I got back in the house, turned the lights off again. I didn't finish up my work for that evening. I got my firearms out. I did not wake my wife up. I just basically sat there the rest of the evening until she got up in the morning. And I did not tell her immediately what I had heard, not because I know if she had heard it, after what we'd seen that evening, we would have had to leave at that point. That wasn't something that was, a good option for us at that time. So I didn't say nothing, but I knew at that point this thing was dangerous, and I was going to have to get proper equipment to deal with it. So, yeah, the discussion came up later when we had to spend some money to buy additional equipment.
Wow, that's a rough night.
That was.
You said the hair in the back of your neck stood up, but did it make the hair in your butt stand up? If that didn't, I don't know what would.
Yeah.
But did you ever go out to that area the next day where you heard those sounds coming from?
Yes, I did. And what I was mainly looking for, now at that point again, I didn't have any, additional firepower, just what I had prior, but I felt, I was still nervous, but I felt comfortable enough, that it was daylight and, I was armed. I had a 45 and I had a shotgun with me with, that 12 gauge slugs. So I was confident enough, maybe overconfident, now looking back on it, that I could go out there and nothing would get me in the afternoon like that. And I knew I had been out in that area prior and had seen where those hogs had been bedded down. So I kind of had a good idea of where to start looking, and I was looking more for prints. I was still trying to find footprints from whatever this thing was. That's what I went over there to look for, and could not, because, their hogs, I guess, had tore the area up so bad you couldn't really make heads or tails of prints within there. If you've ever seen a large group of hogs and what they do to an area, they tear it all up, and it's just a mess. So I couldn't really make out any prints in it, but there was blood everywhere. There was no hogs. I didn't see any hogs in there. I didn't see any pieces of the hogs, but there was blood everywhere inside of that place they'd been bedding down. And that scared me really bad.
Oh, I'll bet it did. After you had that encounter, you'd go on the back deck and smoke from time to time. When you would, you said you'd hear things in the woods. Please tell us more about that.
Yeah, you'd hear movement. You always hear stuff in the woods. Anybody who's lived out in the sticks knows this. animals make noises, all of them, even the small ones, something like here in Florida, we have armadillos, possums, a lot of possums and armadillos and raccoons. But, even something like an armadillo, walking through the brush, back in the tree line, on the dead leaves, it sounds loud. And a lot of times it sounds louder than what you're actually looking at making the noise. So it's not unheard of to hear sounds, but you can always shine a sound like that down. If you got a light, it's not a problem. Shine, if you play around a little bit, you'll figure out what's making noise. This wasn't that kind of noise. It was too loud. And, or to me, when I'm listening, trying to listen, it just sounded too loud. It didn't sound like a deer, didn't sound like, any kind of animal like that. It just sounded like a person walking the tree line. And I would sit there with that spotlight and shine in the tree line and try to catch what's making that noise. If there's a deer or something, you'd see it immediately, which I did all the time. But this, whatever was making that noise, it was like it was trying to avoid being seen in the light, which is unusual for an animal at night. And I personally believe whatever it was hiding behind the trees. So after that happened that evening and I heard the pigs get slaughtered, I had to bring it up with my wife because I knew I was going to have a bigger firearm to deal with this thing if it was coming back near our house. I was not confident with the weapons I had at the time. I knew, again, that if I could get it right in the face with the M4, I believed I could have took it down with that at close range. But I didn't want to be that close, and I wasn't convinced. As scared as I had been the last time when I seen it, I wasn't convinced that I would be able to make that shot. So after that happened that evening with hogs, I realized this thing is dangerous, even if it didn't attack us. If it can do that to a pack of hogs that are vicious themselves in nature and obviously be big enough to carry off the carcass, this thing was nothing to play around with. So I got in touch with a friend of mine that I'd worked with overseas. He was big into hunting, and he had done the whole safari thing in Africa several times, big game guy, and that's what he liked to do. So I talked with him, and I didn't tell him what we had seen, just told him it was something really big and what his suggestion would be to deal with that. And of course he said, well, in Florida, you shouldn't have anything. So I said, well, I don't know. Maybe somebody bred it up out here, raised something that ain't supposed to be here or whatever. And he told me, he said, well, he would recommend 300 Win Mag. He said, I've taken them on safari. He said, they'll take down anything that's in North America. He said, Florida. He said, there's nothing living in Florida that you need a weapon that big for. So he said, you should be fine with that. So on his advice, talked to my wife and I told her, I said, look, we're going to either have to move out of here, which is going to look bad on us, considering who owns the ranch and who these people are. It would look bad on us if we just up and leave, a few months into this gig. So I need to spend the money. We're going to have to, buy another weapon. And I bought a Winchester 300 Magnum and full kit. When I had it ordered and picked up from the gun store down there, I was getting the eyebrows raised again. The people, well, what do you need something that big for? It's too big for anything in this area. Like I've never hunted before in my life and don't know that myself. And I was not going to tell anybody what we've seen. So once I got that back home, I started a several week routine where I'd wait for my wife to go to bed. And once I was done with my stuff, I would cut the lights off there in the kitchen and open the two big dining room windows. And I'd set the rifle up and I'd sit there and wait, had a little night scope and would just keep an eye on that tree. And I was hoping, that this thing would come back up. And I felt confident. Now after speaking with you, I don't know if what I was doing was a good idea or not, but I felt confident at the time that with the 300 Winnie, if I could get it in the crosshairs, especially at that range, and take a shot, I'd knock it down, regardless of where I hit it, as long as it's in the upper torso area. That should do the trick. I did that for several weeks afterwards in the evening, all my free time, and of course it never came back to the tree. I never got a shot at it. Now looking back on it, maybe it was my way of trying to deal with the fact that it had scared us and scared me so bad the first night I seen it. I just didn't like being scared like that. I've never been scared of really anything like that to that level of fear. And I think this was maybe my way of, trying to convince myself that, this is just an animal, what you've seen, and there's no reason to be that afraid of it. And, you're a human being, you're smarter than this thing. You just get proper tool and you take care of it. And that's probably what that was about more than anything else, looking back on it.
I'm so glad you never got a chance to fire around at this thing, because I don't think that would have gone too well.
After you told me what you told me, I started thinking about it, and that's kind of a scary thought as well.
It is. Do you know if there are any Native American burial grounds near that ranch?
Well, on the ranch itself, I know that now this is Central Florida or North Central Florida. It's very flat. This is cattle country. We got woods, but it's very, very flat land. Near the exit of the ranch, the front end, me and my wife had discussed this in the past, wondering what these things were. There were these big mounds, and they just look out of place. Now, what they are, I have no idea. I never asked. When I was there, never thought about asking. Indian mounds are pretty common in Florida, especially in north central Florida and the Panhandle area. Indian mounds are a pretty common feature, so I never thought about asking on the ranch. I do know for a fact, though, that the ranch owners and their children, and even some of the people that worked on the ranch in the farming areas, that these people had always been finding Indian arrowheads, and that was pretty common occurrence there on the ranch when they were out planting watermelon or whatever to find arrowheads. So I know there was an Indian presence on the ranch, prior to Europeans moving into the area, and it had probably been for a while, and I never thought about that until you asked me about the Indian mounds. Noticing those things on the ranch, I never even gave that a second thought. I just assumed it's some kind of odd, geological feature, but now that you brought it up, and the arrowheads and everything else, it's very possible that those were Indian mounds there on that ranch.
I wouldn't be surprised if those were. Would you describe that dog man's head you and your wife saw that night as being more canine-like or more like a baboon's?
This is the thing. Me and my wife really, and we've seen the same thing. I'm trying to get her to tell me independently of me telling her what she's seen, and she described the same thing I know I seen. Wolf-like, I guess, is the way you would describe it, but not necessarily like our German Shepherd. Yeah, me and my wife have discussed the head, and the best way to describe it is wolf-like. Not necessarily, though, like our German Shepherd. She's described it the best way as our German Shepherd. When you're looking at her head, face on, straight forward, when you're looking at her head, her muzzle is more narrow. What we seen was wolf-like or dog-like, but it was more oval-shaped. I guess more heart-shaped, maybe oval-shaped. I don't know how you describe that, heart-shaped, I guess. And the snout was blunter. It wasn't as long and narrow necessarily as Nora's snout, proportionally. I guess it's what I'm trying to say, proportionally to the head. It's still snout. There was a snout there, just not proportionally maybe as narrow and long as Nora's. That's the best way to describe the actual head. It was definitely wolf-like. And ears, it is the thing, ears were just like almost identical to Nora's ears. They were very pointy, look like ears on a German Shepherd.
Yeah, from the way you describe it, it sure sounds to me like it was, in fact, a canine-type dog man instead of a Type 3. Type 3s have hominid-style legs, whereas a canine type, of course, they have canine-style legs. Not to shake you up, but have you and your wife ever considered the possibility that dog man you saw wasn't alone?
I had never thought about that until you asked me. Looking back on it now, it's possible that there were more in that area. It was such an overwhelming thing to see just one. That was enough for me and her. There didn't have to be any more. This thing was so big and so terrifying. The thought of, well, is there multiple things? Now, it didn't even cross my mind until you brought it up. That would be really terrifying to encounter something like that, more than one of them.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. I know your wife was really shaken up by that encounter the two of you had, but how's she dealing with it now?
I mean, I think after you spoke with her, she's a little better. I mean, she did like what you told her about Montana not being as prone to these kind of things, stuff like that. So that set her at ease maybe a little there. But I guess she thought about it. She was discussing it with me, what you said. And yeah, you know, if the thing really wanted to get you, if it really wanted to get us that night, it probably could have. So maybe that wasn't what it's wanting to do, I guess. I think I was affected more by it than even she was. I mean, as far as interrupting what I, you know, did in my life, because I just never could go outside after dark again, and I was looking forward to enjoying that on the ranch. You know, I had bought a pretty nice telescope, hooked up to the computer and everything, and was planning on, you know, spending a lot of nights out there stargazing, you know, with that. It was a hobby of mine, and no light pollution, you know, in that area was a great thing I was looking forward to. And I never got a chance to do that after we've seen this thing that evening. I would not go back out in the evening, especially not with a telescope.
Yeah, dogman encounters do tend to put the kibosh on outdoor activities like that at night. Well, Jay, it's about time for us to get out of here, but before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Just, if you see something like this, you're not alone. There are other people that see it. Not everybody that's seeing something like this is crazy. I've heard a lot of people talking about hunting these things, and after speaking with you prior to this phone call, you start questioning again, what are these things? Is it a legitimate animal that's just native to this part of the world and for whatever reason has been stealthy enough, sly enough to escape detection? I find that hard to believe personally, but, you know, is it possible? Okay, I guess so. Depending on the intelligence of these things, if they have a high enough IQ, maybe they can successfully avoid being detected by us. Or is it paranormal? Is it something else? And this is the question, you know, I have after seeing it. You know, I've seen something that shouldn't be there. I mean, we've got, I've looked into this. You know, we have things in the recent past, and I mean, chronologically, the recent past, I'm saying, you know, past 10, 15,000 years, we've had large, half canine or half dog. They actually call them dog bears. I can't pronounce the correct name for them, but they're called dog bears or bear dogs, I believe. These were these large, you know, just what it sounds like, dog, bear-sized, wolfish dogs. I don't know what you'd call them. They were native to the United States at one time. Now, could it be one of these things that's just escape detection? You know, people are saying possibly, but I mean, it's just an animal. At the end of the day, you would think these things would be easy to find. So I guess what I'm saying is that's the one thing I find hard to believe, that unless these things are, you know, smarter than great apes, they have to be smarter than that. It kind of blows my mind that we wouldn't have found them already. So it makes me lean towards something that I'm not really comfortable leaning towards, you know, as a person of science and engineering, not comfortable leaning towards the paranormal for an explanation of these things, but it makes you start grappling with those kind of questions, you know, are these things paranormal? And if it's paranormal, then I don't know how to deal with something like that. You know, what tool do you use? What tools do we have at our disposal to deal with something like this? It's definitely not anything man-made. So it makes me uncomfortable even thinking about that. And I would probably, you know, advise the people that have seen these things or having an encounter themselves, you know, around their home, if their situation like me and my wife were in, you know, maybe you ought to think twice about taking the hunting rifle and going and looking for them. I never really thought about it from this point of view until I spoke with you, and that may not be the best idea.
Well said. Yeah, for the people who have tried taking up arms and firing at these things, it normally didn't work out all that well for them, so I think you're on to something. Well, Jay, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and telling us about that experience. I really do appreciate it.
No problem, Vic. Thanks for having me, and this really did help me and my wife deal with this.
Well, you're welcome. I'm so glad it helped. Well, have a great night, okay?
Yeah, you too, Vic.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.